The paintbrush slipped from my trembling fingers, leaving a streak of cerulean blue across the hardwood floor of my studio. Through the thin walls, I could hear my daughter Rebecca's voice cutting through the afternoon air like a blade through silk. "Mother's lost her mind completely, David. 73 years old, and she's up there playing with finger paints like a toddler." My son's laughter joined hers, that familiar bark that had haunted my dinner tables for decades. At least when Dad was alive, he kept her grounded. Now she's just... what did the therapist call it? Regressing. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of my studio window, watching them through the gap in my curtains as they stood in my garden below, Rebecca's manicured hands gesturing wildly at my house like it was some sort of crime scene. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil filled my nostrils, mixing with the faint aroma of the jasmine that climbed the trellis outside. These smells had become my sanctuary over the past 3 years, ever since Harold passed and left me with nothing but time and the art supplies he'd bought me for my 70th birthday. "A hobby," he'd called it then, kissing my forehead. "Something to keep your hands busy." But my hands had found something more than busy work in those brushes. They'd found a voice I'd forgotten I had. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. Rebecca's voice drifted up again, sharper now. "We need to stage an intervention before she wastes any more money on this nonsense. Do you know how much those art supplies cost? I saw the receipts, David. Hundreds of dollars on canvas and paints while she's living on Social Security." I stepped back from the window, my bare feet silent against the paint-splattered drop cloth I'd spread across the floor months ago. The late afternoon sun slanted through the studio, casting long shadows across the dozen canvases that lined the walls. Some were finished, others half-completed dreams that seemed to shift and breathe in the changing light. Each one held a piece of me that I'd never shared with another soul, not even Harold. My fingers found the edge of my latest painting, a landscape of the lake where Harold and I had spent our honeymoon 50 years ago. The water seemed to ripple under my touch, blues and greens swirling together like memories made manifest. "She's hoarding them up there," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd inherited from her grandmother, my late mother-in-law. "Stacks and stacks of amateur paintings that nobody will ever want. When she's gone, we'll have to throw them all away anyway." The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable landing somewhere deep in my chest where dreams go to die. I'd always known my children saw me as a burden, a relic from another time who'd outlived her usefulness. But to hear them discussing my funeral preparations while I was still breathing, still creating, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would see what I saw in these canvases. A knock at my front door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. I glanced at the clock on my easel, surprised to see it was nearly 5. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Rebecca and David were still in the garden, their voices now muffled but no less cutting. I made my way downstairs, wiping paint from my fingers with the old towel I kept tucked in my apron pocket. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out a tall figure in a dark suit. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. In my neighborhood, men in suits usually meant bad news, collection notices, or worse. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a woman in her 40s, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made me unconsciously smooth down my paint-stained smock. "Mrs. Harrington." Her voice was cultured, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm an art appraiser from the Sterling Gallery in the city. I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but I was hoping we might have a conversation about your work." The words seemed to float in the air between us, impossible and dreamlike. I blinked, certain I'd misheard her, that this was some elaborate prank my children had orchestrated to prove how far I'd fallen into delusion. "My work." The words came out as barely a whisper. Victoria Sterling smiled, and something in her expression reminded me of the way Harold used to look at me when I'd catch him watching me read, like I was something precious and rare. "Mrs. Harrington, someone brought one of your paintings to my gallery last week. A small landscape, signed OH in the corner. I have to ask." She paused, her eyes searching my face. Do you have any idea who your great-grandfather was? The question hit me like lightning, illuminating dark corners of my memory I'd kept locked away for decades. My great-grandfather, Oleander Harrington, the family black sheep who'd died penniless and alone. His paintings dismissed as the worthless dabbling of a madman. But Victoria Sterling was standing on my doorstep, asking about him with the reverence of someone who knew something I didn't. What secret had just walked up to my door? My knees nearly buckled as Victoria Sterling's words echoed in the narrow hallway of my home. The smell of my neighbor's evening cooking, garlic and onions sizzling in olive oil, drifted through the screen door behind her, but all I could focus on was the way she was looking at me, like I held the key to some magnificent treasure. Oleander Harrington, I whispered, my voice catching on his name. He painted, yes. But the family always said his work was worthless. When he died in 1943, they burned most of his canvases in the backyard. Victoria's eyes widened, and she pressed her hand to her chest as if I'd just told her about a library burning down. Mrs. Harrington, may I come in? What I have to tell you. It's going to change everything. I stepped aside, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. Through the window, I could still see Rebecca and David in the garden, their heads bent together in conspiratorial whispers. They had no idea that their delusional mother was about to discover something that would make their cruel words taste like ash in their mouths. Victoria settled into Harold's old leather chair. Her briefcase balanced on her knees with the careful precision of someone who carried important things. The late afternoon light streaming through my lace curtains caught the silver threads in her hair, making her look almost ethereal. Your great-grandfather, she began, opening her briefcase with a soft click, was Oleander Harrington, wasn't he? Born in 1889, died in poverty and obscurity. I nodded, sinking into my own chair across from her. The family was ashamed of him. My grandfather used to say Oleander was a dreamer who wasted his life chasing rainbows with a paintbrush. Victoria pulled out a thick manila folder and spread several photographs across my coffee table. My breath caught in my throat. The paintings in the photos were unmistakably in the same style as the work gathering dust in my studio upstairs. Bold, emotional landscapes that seemed to pulse with life. Mrs. Harrington, your great-grandfather wasn't just any painter. He was part of a movement called American Luminism, but his work was considered too avant-garde for his time. He painted emotion into landscape in ways that wouldn't be appreciated until decades after his death. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Last month, one of his paintings sold at Sotheby's for $2.3 million. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling like I was falling through space and time. That's impossible. The family destroyed everything. Not everything. Victoria's smile was gentle but triumphant. It seems some pieces survived, scattered to collectors and small galleries over the decades. And now, seeing your work. She gestured toward the ceiling, toward my studio. The technique, the emotional resonance, the way you layer color. It's extraordinary how genetic memory can express itself through art. A sound escaped my throat, something between a laugh and a sob. All those years of Harold calling it a hobby, of Rebecca and David dismissing my passion as the foolish wandering of an aging mind. And here was this elegant woman telling me that my blood carried the legacy of a master. The painting that was brought to my gallery, Victoria continued. It was signed with your initials. Someone from your family must have taken it from your home. Ice water seemed to flow through my veins. What did this person look like? A woman, mid-40s, blonde hair, expensive clothing. She said she was cleaning out an elderly relative's home and thought the painting might have some small value as a curiosity piece. Rebecca. My own daughter had stolen one of my paintings and tried to sell it like a piece of unwanted furniture from a garage sale. Before I could process this betrayal fully, the front door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her face flushed with righteous anger, David hovering behind her like her personal storm cloud. Mother, what is going on here? Rebecca's gaze swept over Victoria, taking in the expensive suit, the briefcase, the photograph spread across the table. If someone's trying to sell you something, I can assure you we don't have money for. Her words died as her eyes fell on the photographs. I watched the color drain from her face as she recognized her grandfather's landscapes, the same emotional style she'd been mocking just an hour before. Victoria stood with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. Ms. Harrington, I presume. I'm Victoria Sterling from Sterling Gallery. I was just explaining to your mother that the painting you brought to us last week has generated quite a bit of interest. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. David stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in even as confusion clouded his features. I'm sorry, what painting? We haven't sold anything. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. The landscape piece, signed O.H. Your sister brought it to us 7 days ago, claiming it was from an estate cleanup. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds. Rebecca's face had gone from flushed to ashen, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching her purse strap like a lifeline. That is, Mother, I thought it was just cluttering up the house and you stole from me. The words came out of my mouth with a calmness that surprised even me. Decades of keeping peace, of swallowing hurt, of letting them treat me like a burden evaporated in that moment. You took my work and tried to sell it like garbage. David stepped between us, his hands raised in what he probably thought was a calming gesture. Now let's all just take a breath here. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Victoria cleared her throat, and every eye in the room turned to her. She was looking at Rebecca with the expression of a cat who'd cornered a particularly interesting mouse. Ms. Harrington, I should mention that we've had several inquiries about that piece since it arrived. The current highest offer is sitting at $47,000. Rebecca sank into the nearest chair as if her legs had given out. David's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, realization, and finally, something that looked remarkably like greed. But Victoria wasn't finished. She turned back to me, her voice soft with what sounded like genuine excitement. Mrs. Harrington, based on what I've seen of your great-grandfather's work and the single piece of yours that we have, I'd very much like to see the rest of your collection. If your other paintings are of similar quality. She paused, letting the weight of possibility hang in the air. We might be looking at a career-defining exhibition. And a considerable financial opportunity. My heart was racing so fast I was surprised it didn't burst right out of my chest. All those canvases upstairs, all those hours of pouring my soul onto canvas while my children planned to throw my life's work in the trash. Rebecca found her voice first, the same sharp tone she'd used in the garden but now laced with desperate sweetness. Mother, this is wonderful news. We should definitely explore this opportunity together. As a family. The word family, coming from her lips after what I'd just discovered, made something dark and powerful unfurl in my chest. For 73 years, I'd been the dutiful daughter, wife, and mother. I'd smiled through condescension, swallowed insults, and let others decide my worth. Not anymore. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 73 years in my bones, but also feeling something else. A strength I didn't know I possessed. Victoria, I said, never taking my eyes off my children's faces. I'd be delighted to show you my work. But first, I think Rebecca owes me something. Rebecca's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic creeping across her features. Mother, I was just trying to. My painting. I want it back. Tonight. The room fell silent except for the sound of Rebecca's sharp, shallow breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. Victoria was watching this family drama unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing a masterpiece being revealed brushstroke by brushstroke. Then David, ever the problem solver, stepped forward with the confident smile he used in courtrooms. Of course we'll get your painting back, Mom. But maybe we should discuss how to handle this windfall. As a family unit. Pool our resources, get professional advice. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The gesture was simple, but the authority behind it was something none of us had expected, least of all me. David, Rebecca, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. But before I could continue, a new sound filled the room, the distinctive chime of Victoria's phone receiving a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went completely white. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement, "I need to ask you something very important. How many paintings do you have upstairs?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something in Victoria's tone made the air in the room feel suddenly electric, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. What had that text message said that could make an experienced art appraiser look like she'd seen a ghost? Victoria's phone trembled in her manicured hands as she stared at the screen, her face cycling through expressions I couldn't read. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder in the sudden silence, each second stretching like taffy between us. "Mrs. Harrington," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper, "how many paintings do you have upstairs?" Something in her tone made my stomach clench. Rebecca and David exchanged glances, their earlier panic now mixed with curiosity. I could practically see the dollar signs calculating behind David's eyes. 43, I said, the number rolling off my tongue with surprising ease. "I've been painting steadily for 3 years. Some are small studies, others are full landscapes." "Why?" Victoria set her phone down on the coffee table with the careful precision of someone handling dynamite. "I just received a message from my colleague in London. Mrs. Harrington, they've been researching your great-grandfather's work since I sent them photos of Rebecca's painting yesterday." She paused, pressing her lips together as if the words she was about to speak were too enormous to release carelessly. "They believe Oleander Harrington didn't just influence American luminism. They think he may have been the movement's secret founder." The room seemed to shrink around me. Rebecca's sharp intake of breath sounded like a gunshot in the quiet space. "What does that mean?" David asked, his lawyer voice steady but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Victoria stood up and walked to my front window, her silhouette dark against the fading afternoon light. "It means that every authenticated Oleander Harrington painting could be worth upwards of $5 million. And if Mrs. Harrington's work carries even a fraction of that genetic legacy." She turned back to face us, her eyes finding mine across the room. "We could be looking at the most significant art discovery of the decade." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp but impossible to ignore. $5 million. Per painting. I thought of the 43 canvases upstairs, stacked against walls and propped on easels, each one holding pieces of my heart I'd never dared show anyone. Rebecca was the first to break. She launched herself from her chair with the desperate energy of someone drowning, her perfectly composed facade cracking like old paint. "Mother, please, you have to understand. I was trying to help. The house is so cluttered with your paintings, and I thought if I could just sell 1 or 2 of the smaller ones, maybe we could use the money for your medical expenses or improvements to the house or—" "Stop!" The word came out of my mouth with such authority that Rebecca actually took a step backward. "Just stop talking." For the first time in my adult life, my daughter was afraid of me. The realization should have been disturbing, but instead, it filled me with a strange, intoxicating power. David, sensing the shift in dynamics, moved closer to his sister. "Mom, I think what Rebecca is trying to say is that we're all family here. Whatever value these paintings have, we should approach this together. With proper legal guidance, of course." Victoria cleared her throat delicately. "Before we discuss anything further, I should mention that I've already contacted the authorities about the stolen painting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rebecca's face went from pale to gray. "Stolen?" David's voice cracked slightly. "Now wait just a minute. Taking someone's property without permission and attempting to sell it is theft, regardless of familial relationships." Victoria's tone was matter-of-fact, but there was steel underneath the silk. "However, Mrs. Harrington, if you chose not to press charges—" All eyes turned to me. My children, who had spent the afternoon mocking my worthless hobby, were now hanging on my every word. The irony was so thick I could taste it, bitter and sweet at the same time. I walked to the mantelpiece where Harold's picture sat in its silver frame, his kind eyes staring out at the chaos our living room had become. He'd always seen something in me that others missed, had encouraged me to take up painting even when his own health was failing. "Harold bought me my first set of paints for my 70th birthday," I said, my fingers tracing the edge of his photograph. "Do you know what you said, Rebecca?" My daughter's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You said it was a waste of money, that I was too old to start something new, too set in my ways to learn. You said Harold was just humoring a foolish old woman." I turned to face her, and she flinched as if I'd raised my hand. "And you, David, you suggested we return the supplies to the store because they were impractical for someone my age." The memories poured out of me like paint from an overturned jar, years of small cruelties and casual dismissals that had accumulated into a portrait of my own invisibility. "For 3 years, I've painted upstairs while you made plans for my future. Plans that didn't include asking me what I wanted. You've discussed my medical care, my living situation, even my funeral arrangements, but never once did either of you think to ask me about my art." Victoria watched this family drama unfold with the fascination of someone studying a particularly compelling canvas. Her phone buzzed again and she glanced at it, her eyebrows shooting up toward her hairline. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm getting more information from London. They want to know if you'd be willing to participate in authentication tests. Carbon dating, brushstroke analysis, pigment composition." She paused, scrolling through the message. "They're prepared to offer you an advance of $50,000 just for the exclusive right to examine your collection." Rebecca made a sound that was part gasp, part sob. David grabbed the back of a chair so hard his knuckles went white. "50,000, he repeated, his voice hollow. "Just to look at them." "That's right," Victoria confirmed. "And if even half of your paintings authenticate as carrying the Oleander Harrington genetic signature, we're looking at a collection worth potentially $200 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. $200 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Sitting upstairs in my cluttered studio where I'd retreated every day to escape the casual cruelty of people who were supposed to love me." Rebecca sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mascara leaving dark tracks like brushstrokes on canvas. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never dreamed." "No, you didn't dream," I agreed, my voice surprisingly steady. "That was always the problem. You never believed in dreams." David cleared his throat, falling back on his professional training. "Mom, this is incredible news, obviously. But we need to be smart about this. Art authentication can be tricky, valuations can fluctuate, and there are tax implications we need to consider. As your family, we want to make sure you're protected." "Protected?" The word came out as a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "David, where was this concern for my protection when you were planning to throw my life's work in the garbage?" Victoria's phone buzzed a third time, and this time she actually gasped when she read the message. She looked up at me with eyes wide as saucers. "Mrs. Harrington, I need to ask you something else. Did your great-grandfather ever paint a series called The Lost Seasons?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the mantelpiece for support, my knees suddenly weak. "How could you possibly know about that?" I whispered. Victoria's hands were shaking as she held up her phone. "Because according to my colleague in London, those 4 paintings have been listed as lost masterpieces for over 80 years. The art world has been looking for them since your great-grandfather's death. They're considered the holy grail of American luminism." The room started to spin. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, standing in my great-grandfather's studio in the weeks before he died. He'd been showing me 4 paintings unlike any others he'd done, one for each season, but painted with such emotional depth that they seemed to breathe on their own. "He gave them to me," I said, my voice barely audible. "Before he died, he made me promise to keep them safe. My parents thought they were just more of his worthless work, so they let me keep them in my bedroom. When I got married, I took them with me. They've been in my attic for 50 years. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Victoria looked like she might faint. Rebecca had stopped crying and was staring at me with her mouth open. David appeared to be doing complex mathematical calculations in his head. "Mrs. Harrington," Victoria said carefully, as if she were talking to someone perched on the edge of a cliff, "if those are authentic Oleander Harrington originals from the Lost Season series, each painting could be worth between $15 and $20 million. The numbers were beyond comprehension now. $80 million, hidden in my attic like Christmas decorations, while my children planned to throw away my own work as worthless clutter." Rebecca found her voice first, raw with desperation. "Mom, please, you have to believe me, I was only trying to help. If I had known. If you had known, you would have stolen those too." The words came out flat and final, cutting through her protests like a blade through silk. David stepped forward, his hands raised in supplication. "Mom, let's not say things we can't take back. We're family. Whatever mistakes were made, we can work through them together." I looked at my children, really looked at them for the first time in years. I saw the greed glittering in their eyes, the calculations running behind their concerned expressions. They weren't seeing their mother who had finally found something that brought her joy. They were seeing dollar signs and inheritance opportunities. "Victoria," I said, turning away from my children, "what would you recommend I do?" Her professional composure had returned, though I could see excitement still sparkling in her eyes. "I'd recommend we secure your collection immediately. Move everything to a climate-controlled facility where it can be properly examined and authenticated. Based on what I've seen and heard today, you're in possession of what could be the most valuable private art collection discovered in decades." "And my family?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. Victoria's expression grew carefully neutral. "That's entirely your decision, Mrs. Harrington. But I would recommend consulting with an attorney who specializes in art law before making any commitments about shared ownership or management." Rebecca let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Shared ownership. Mom, we're your children. We're not asking to own anything. We just want to help you manage this windfall. Make sure you're not taken advantage of." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This morning they'd been planning to throw my paintings away. This afternoon they wanted to help me manage my fortune. I walked to the front window and looked out at my garden, where Harold had planted roses for our 40th wedding anniversary. The evening light was painting everything in shades of gold and amber, the kind of light that had inspired me to pick up a paintbrush in the first place. "I need some time to think," I said finally. "Victoria, would it be possible to arrange for the collection to be moved tomorrow?" "Absolutely. I can have a specialized transport team here first thing in the morning." I nodded, then turned back to face my children. Rebecca's makeup was completely ruined now, streaks of mascara painting abstract patterns on her cheeks. David looked like he was fighting internal battles between his legal training and his family loyalty. "I want both of you to leave now," I said quietly. "Mom," David started. "Leave. We'll talk after I've had time to process all of this." Rebecca stood on unsteady legs, her designer purse clutched against her chest like armor. "Mother, please just remember that we love you. Whatever happens with these paintings, that hasn't changed." The words should have meant something. They should have softened the hard edges of my anger, should have reminded me that blood runs deeper than money. Instead, they rang hollow as coins dropped in an empty well. "Do you?" asked. "Do you love me, or do you love the idea of me? Because the woman you've been talking about all afternoon, the delusional old lady wasting time with finger paints, that woman doesn't exist. She never did. I've been hiding who I really am for so long that even I forgot." Victoria gathered her papers and photos, sliding them into her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Harrington, I'll call you first thing tomorrow morning to coordinate the transport. And I want you to know, regardless of the monetary value, your work is extraordinary. You have a gift that deserves to be shared with the world." After they left, Victoria with promises to return, My children with wounded expressions and muttered conversations I couldn't quite hear. I climbed the stairs to my studio. The late evening light was streaming through the windows, setting my paintings ablaze with color and possibility. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 3 years of secret creation, and for the first time in my adult life I felt truly free. Free from the weight of others' expectations, free from the need to make myself smaller to fit into the spaces they'd carved out for me, free to be the artist I'd always been but never dared admit.